Pillowcase ready for the pillowcase dress. Already measured the length, and I need this dress to be as long as possible because this is quite a tall child. So I just cut off this end all the way across. The other end, the open end, is ready hemmed for us, so it saves a job. I then fold the pillowcase in half lengthways so I can cut out the armholes. I have a small template for the armhole. Just pin that on up to the edge. And cut round it. That makes the armholes. Now all I'm going to do next is to fold in approximately 1/4 inch and pin it. I'm just sewing under that 1/4 inch. This is the start of making the casing to hold the elastic. You can see where I've turned in the 1/4 inch and stitched. Then I'm going to fold that over onto the inside of the pillowcase and pin it at 3/4 inch. So in fact we've actually used 1 inch of the fabric. This will make a casing to thread the elastic through. So I'll pin this and then stitch it. You do the same on both sides so that they're exactly the same. Just going to put the safety pin onto the end of the elastic. I've measured 6 inches of elastic to go across the front of the dress, the same length for the back. Thread the safety pin in and start to feed the fabric over the elastic. When you get to the end of the elastic here, pin it to the fabric so that you don't lose it all the way through the casing. Doesn't take long to do this. And I've got a little bit of help from the cat. That's it, that's just gone in the end there. So I've pulled the elastic through. I've put a pin in that end so that it doesn't disappear through the casing, and I'll just put a pin at this end to secure it. Then you just stitch across the casing here where the pin is to secure the elastic at both ends, and you do the same for the other side. That's the elastic in the casing, and as you can see it's gathered it all up quite nicely. Next you need to cut 28 inches of bias binding. That's going to bind the armhole and make the ties at the shoulders. So what you do is find halfway on your tape, match that to the seam on the pillowcase. We're going to open out the tape, match that, and undo that bit of binding so we can stitch it on. I'll just pin that. I've just pinned the bias binding round the armhole. The rest we'll sew together later, and you just stitch in the channel there in the crease, and that will just hold the binding onto the armhole. Forwards, a few stitches back to secure, forwards again. Take your pins out as you go, and just stitch around the armhole. This is the bias binding sewn onto the armhole, as you can see. I'm now going to roll the binding over like that, so there'll be no raw edges. I'll pin it all the way round. Also, pinning up this loose piece, just fold the end in like that so you have no raw edges, fold it over to make the tie, and these make very thin shoulder ties for the little girl's sundress, like that. So that will all be pinned and then stitched. Just stitching the ties, which as you can see are now really thin, ideal for on a little girl's shoulders, and then the tie then becomes the binding round the armhole. Just make sure the bias binding is wrapped over the raw edges. That will give a nice neat finish. This is the bottom of the pillowcase, which I said we wouldn't have to hem because that's the opening already finished off. But you have this flap that obviously was where you tuck the pillow under. So rather than cut it off, we're going to stitch it down. But to cover up, because the stitching is going to go right across the bottom, I'm going to sew on some ribbon right the way around the dress. I'm going to pin that on first. Just machining the ribbon onto the dresses. I've already done one row of stitching, just finishing off the other row. That's it, a couple of stitches backwards to secure it. There we go. As you can see, the ribbon has now secured that flap of fabric, so the dress is now finished, and I can show you that with the other one. Two finished pillowcase dresses, ready for little girls to wear through the summer, little sundresses.